Today is Tuesday, November 5th. Pepe Escobar is here with us to talk about what's going on in the world. And today is the day.
The big show.
Yeah. Yeah. When we look at what's going on right now in the United States, many people are so happy. Maybe they're thinking that Donald Trump can change something in the United States foreign policy. But when you look at the situation right now, do you think, in terms of what's going on in the Middle East, in Ukraine, and overall in the world, what does it mean? The new candidate, one of them, Kamala Harris or Donald Trump, is it going to change anything in terms of what's going on with the foreign policy of the United States?
It's an excellent question, Nima. We can try to answer on a comic level, on a tragic comic level, and on a, let's say, uh, realpolitik level. Okay, on the comic level, and that's not comic at all, we have Zionist 1 against Zionist 2. So whoever wins, we know we know who really wins. And in terms of finance geoeconomic level, one of the guy who wins, he already said so. He already said so on the record. Larry Flink from BlackRock. He said that whoever wins is going to be very good for Wall Street. Obviously, because both candidates are manipulated by Wall Street interests and especially the big three: BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street. So we already know who wins, and we already know which economic interests win. Coming back to the tragic comic point of it, we can say that maybe Kamala Harris, if she wins, the decline of the empire will go, I would say, as a Maserati turbo in seventh gear. With Trump, maybe slightly slower. Trump will be maybe, let's say, an Audi in fifth gear, but the decline will be inevitable as well. In terms of wars, I'm being very, very concise, and we can explore this later on, of course. In terms of wars, with a Kamala win, we're going to have essentially more war against Russia, whatever way the Democrats devise it, using NATO. And of course, nothing's going to change in West Asia. With Trump is much more complicated because we might have less war in Ukraine. We don't know. This is what he is promising. So we cannot take him at face value, not yet. But on other fronts, this can be absolutely horrible. So let me go back to a few of the. I'm taking a few notes for writing a column as soon as we have. I'm not. I don't think we're going to have a definitive result. We're going to have projections that can be or cannot be credible, right? But once we have more or less a scenario, and of course, this is going to be contested to hell. We all know whatever happens and whoever wins or is poised to win, right? Um, some of the already announced Trump policies by himself and some of his possible hawkish advisors, and some that could materialize soon, especially considering what happened in the past few hours. I'm sure you saw it, and our audience also saw it. Mike Pompeo's return to the limelight. This is extremely worrying for everyone. I'm sure you all remember that he was CIA director and Secretary of State during Trump. He is essentially an aspiring Tony Soprano. He is a gangster that would like to be as smooth and as sharp as Tony Soprano, but still a gangster, essentially. You all remember his extremely aggressive foreign policy. And I guess the three top so-called existential threats to the US, Russia, Iran, and China, especially against Iran. And I'm sure all of you know that since 2023, December last year, he is a board member of a Ukrainian telecom company, Kyivstar. So he's getting money from those gangsters on the other side, the Ukrainian mafia, essentially, right? So what happened in terms of foreign policy, very important during Trump's terms. I'll give you three examples, among many, of course. We could talk about Venezuela, about Syria, about Cuba, but let's focus on Iran and West Asia and Ukraine, Russia, Ukraine. Very few people remember. And when Trump a few days ago said that he killed Nord Stream, that was not completely absurd a la Trump, you know, those megalomaniac narcissistic statements. If you go to my Telegram channel, you find I posted a few minutes ago that ghastly Atlantic Council. They published something basically saying U.S. sanctions block Putin's pipeline, as if Putin one day woke up and decided to build a pipeline from Russia to Germany. So obviously, these agents don't consider this as a consortium of companies, most of them European, that this has been discussed and planned for years and all that. So forget it. So this is Putin's pipeline because he decided to build a second pipeline to Germany. And so, in fact, these Trump sanctions, they blocked the continuation of Nord Stream 2, but Russia bypassed it, and Nord Stream 2 was concluded and was finished in the end. So this was one thing. So in terms of saying that Trump will find a credible solution to propose to the Russian vis-a-vis Ukraine, that's a bit of a stretch. And what leaked so far of his ceasefire plan and solving the war with one phone call, as he likes to brag, it's nonsense. And the Russians are not expecting anything really conclusive coming from Trump and his team, even during this, if he's elected, even during this period before he gets to power in January. The other thing that I'm sure everyone remembers, you and our audience, Trump broke the JCPOA. He canceled the JCPOA, which was an incredibly complicated negotiation lasting years. The Iranians played ball until the last minute. I followed the last days in Vienna, and we had special briefings by the Iranian delegations. We were a small group of independent analysts and journalists, and we had very good access to the Iranian delegation. They would bring us at the end of the day for a briefing practically every day. And in one of those briefings, Zarif himself came and he explained to us what was really going on. So in the end, the Iranians played ball. They signed an imperfect agreement, but in the end, it was an agreement. Everybody agreed with it. The Russians, the Chinese, the Brits, the French, Germany was an outside player, and Iran. So this was broken, and this was ratified by the UN Security Council. Very, very important. Trump broke it. And so we all know that this further destabilized West Asia, and we are living the repercussions of this destroying this deal. And of course, Iran looked at it and has said, obviously, we can never trust them. Iran has been under all forms of harassment by American administration since the Islamic Revolution. Obviously, you cannot, and the definition by Lavrov is perfect. It's the untrustworthy power. They are non-agreement capable. And Trump, by canceling the JCPOA, he proved graphically that you cannot trust the American system, the deep state, any president of the United States, because they break deals. They strike deals and they break deals. This is called rules-based international order, in fact, right? And the third thing, Nima, and all of you, Trump brokered the Abraham Accords, which nobody is talking about anymore for obvious reasons, because we have a genocide in progress, right? So we can say that this was the final nail in the coffin for any possible Israel-Palestine two-state solution. So in fact, Trump broke the concept of a two-state solution, Israel-Palestine. You all remember that he was promoting as deal of the century. No, in fact, this was the worst deal and the most nefarious deal since the famous 1917 Balfour Declaration, that piece of paper that started this whole debacle for a century, you know. So I think this little summary gives to all of you how how simply you cannot trust anything coming from him, or he promises, or he even signs with his own pen, that beautiful signature and all that. So the degree separating both candidates, in fact, Zionist one from Zionist two, is minimalistic, in fact. More wars is guaranteed from both sides. It's the degree of these wars in terms of hybrid war, ultra hardcore hybrid war, or even hot war that separates them. And then, and now I'm basing on what leaked from some of the Trump hawks, which will be in his administration, including Mike Pompeo, who has been the superstar for the past 24 hours. No? So we can more or less figure that there will be military interventions by a Trump administration. And list of possible candidates. Mexico. How they're going to justify that? We need to secure the border. So there could be a military operation against Mexico. Venezuela. No, I would say number one candidate. They need that oil, period. And this is how Trump thinks in terms of Venezuela. Extremely dangerous. And all the hawks agree with him. So this would be application of the Monroe Doctrine against Venezuela. Of course, Israel, Iran, wow. We cannot rule out a bombing campaign against Iran further on down the road. If not next year, by 2026. So this is a very credible possibility. Libya, they need all that oil. Never forget that. This is how Trump thinks. And even Yemen, because the justification will be we need to secure the Red Sea trade route because that's in the interests of Israel. So, you know, this short summary, I think, gives to all of you how dangerous any of these two presidencies will be in terms of foreign policy. Internal domestic policy is a matter for Americans to decide. If they want to, in fact, most of the population would. If there's going to be a de facto civil war starting in January, it's their problem. It does not concern the rest of the world. What concerns the rest of the world is their foreign policy adventures, which simply won't be ended because we're going to have a new presidency.
You've mentioned two important points in this summary. One of them was the Trump's attitude toward Russia. We know the INF Treaty. He was responsible for withdrawing from INF Treaty as well.
Exactly.
And
go ahead, please.
It's on the part of Russia, on the part of Iran, as you've mentioned, JCPOA was a tremendous work altogether. That he just destroyed everything, withdrawing and right now in his recent interview with a podcaster, he said that the only concern he has about Iran is their nuclear program.
Mm-hmm.
If he's thinking really that the problem is the Iran's nuclear program, what he has decided to withdraw from nuclear program. Is he considering this again to be part of a new negotiations, or maybe building on those agreements between the United States, Iran, and other parties? How can we understand his behavior right now? Or it's all about his rhetoric before 2024 presidential election, and right after that, as you mentioned, Mike Pompeo, Nikki Haley, Tom Cotton, these people would dominate his administration.
Hmm. Exactly, Nima. Basically, is about rhetoric, and basically is about putting on a show. There's no substance. I'm sure all of you are aware that Trump rarely gets into detailed substance about any policy. It's just a bombastic announcement, narcissistic, playing around it. It's a running soap opera, usually very cheap, very tawdry, but with a huge entertainment value, of course. The problem is these policies they affect millions and hundreds of millions of people in many cases. His position on Iran is completely dictated by the Zionist lobby. Uh, I don't think he even knows how to articulate his own position on Israel and Iran, and even understanding the concept of the axis of resistance, not to mention understanding the plight of the Palestinians. Definitely not. So we're going to have a return of Jared Kushner, probably in a background role, which is also extremely worrying because Jared is an arrogant brat. Essentially, he doesn't know. I would say, okay, let's be polite. He knows less than zero about foreign policy, but he was dictating foreign policy in terms of West Asia for Trump in his ear after his WhatsApp calls with his Paul MBS, Mohammed bin Salman. So the relationship Jared Kushner and Mohammed bin Salman will be back. Obviously, Jared Kushner will be convincing MBS not to get a deeper affiliation and cooperation with BRICS. Uh, Trump and Jared and others around the president will try to sell to MBS that no, the Abraham Accords, of course, is going to work. Israel, we're going to help Israel. Maybe if we have to bomb Iran, we'll do it. And after that, you're going to be part of this super business, the IMEC corridor, Saudi Arabia, Emirates, Israel, Europe on one side, India on the other. This policy has not changed. So it will be a recap of Trump 1.0, essentially. And on Iran, with Pompeo, probably there's an enormous possibility that Pompeo will be the head of the Pentagon. If that happens, Nima, we're going to be in deep, deep, deep pile of that thing, because Pompeo, in terms of Iran, is a Uber hawk, is a neutral hawk, and he will go for a bombing campaign. That's practically guaranteed. In terms of Harris, maybe I wouldn't say there's a possibility if Harris is elected, the possibility of a dialogue between Pezeshkian, for instance, and the Biden combo behind it, in terms of trying to resuscitate the JCPOA or written guarantees, which I think they will never happen from the Americans, that, okay, let's finally try to find a peaceful solution for the so-called Iran nuclear program. That's it's a long stretch for all that, but it will be less dangerous than a Trump presidency, Pompeo as Minister of Defense, Jared Kushner, who's a warmonger Zionist as well, trying to keep MBS on the sidelines. That includes, once again, the war against the BRICS, which will be a major theme of whoever is elected. I would say this is one of the crucial points for 2025 and beyond, because the forever wars, now they have their subplot now is the main plot. If this was a Netflix series, The BRICS in the beginning were one of the minor characters, and after season 3 or 4, they become the main character in the whole series. And now BRICS is the main character because the war of the ruling classes in the US, and this is bipartisan, this is all over the Beltway, and then going to New York and international financial system, the banking conglomerate, etc., is against the BRICS as an alternative to the rules-based international order. And that explains, for instance, why the American ruling class, via their spokespersons in the American mainstream media, they were immensely irritated by the success of the BRICS meeting in Kazan. They were pissed to death, in fact. And there will be revenge because these people are not tolerant. On the contrary, they are vengeful, and there will be revenge. And the revenge is accelerating various degrees of the hybrid war. In the case of Russia, hot war, right? But the hybrid war against Iran, against China, and the hot war against Russia. So it's hard to see any shining light at the end of our tunnel at the moment, whoever is elected. Because in the case of Harris, it's going to be the Biden combo behind, but not the Biden combo. It's going to be the Obama combo, which is even worse than the Biden combo, with inputs from the Hillary combo as well. So I don't need to explain to any of you, our audience, what that means, right? And with Trump, we're going to have a galaxy of uber hawks around him, pushing for these targeted military operations against anybody that is going against so-called U.S. national security. And something that Trump already said, we don't know if it is true or not, because we never know when he's speaking truth or something, coming out of the back of his mind. The weaponization of the US dollar will go, ramping up as fast as they can, because he already threatened to impose sanctions on everybody who will be trying to bypass the US dollar. This means he's going to impose sanctions on the 9 BRICS to start with, plus the 13 new BRICS partners as well. So he's going to start with imposing sanctions on 22 countries, plus the other ones which are already under sanctions. So it's no wonder all of us, we are quite depressed, Nima, when we look at the overall big picture,
You mentioned a word that is, I think, so important: guarantee and guarantors, in terms of these agreements between the United States, with Russia, China, Iran. And when you look at 2014 and 15 agreement in Minsk 1 and Minsk 2, and the result of those agreements show that none of these guarantors would give anything substantial in terms of what's going on in those agreements. But Russia is important in terms of being more powerful, more strong against the West. And right now, the situation with Iran is the same. The government, the solution is not in the United States, is not anywhere else. The solution is the Iranian people, is the Iranian government, is Iran as a country, Russia as well, China with the situation in Taiwan, unified China. And right now, we have 3 part of this conflict in Ukraine, in the Middle East, and in Taiwan. All of these countries know that any sort of agreement with the United States would be good if they can achieve what they want to achieve. But at the end of the day, the situation of their country, this political system of their country, is more important than what's going on in the United States. Because in the United States, we don't believe that any, as you've mentioned, with Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, nothing gonna change in terms of because a deep state who's deciding about all of these policies, they can change their tactics, but the strategy is the same.
Exactly.
That's why I think Iran, Russia, and China would they would prefer to go, if they want to negotiate, if they want to talk with the United States, they have to find their zone of comfort, their type of strategy, because it's what's important, in my opinion, it's the situation in Russia, in Iran, and China, and how they want to talk with the United States. Do you think that these countries are learning from what has happened in the past to be more realistic? Because let's face it, in Russia, in Iran, in China, they have some concepts about what's going on in the United States, but at the end of the day, what matters the most is the reality of the foreign policy of the United States.
Excellent point, Nima. Excellent point. And the short answer to your question is that these three civilization states, they know the stakes now. They know that we are at a crossroads in the still young 21st century, not to remember Eric Hobsbawm. And it's all being decided now. And they have this little window of opportunity, let's say the next few years of the 2020s, to start something new from scratch, which was the discussion at the BRICS summit in Kazan. And if they fail, the consequences, especially for them, are going to be horrible, because the wounded animal, the wounded, cornered animal, the hegemon, is getting more dangerous by the minute. Because this is not about personalities. This is about their ruling classes, the very rarefied oligarchy that controls not only how the US works, but how the Atlanticist matrix works. And when they look around the world, they see that they are losing power geoeconomically and geopolitically by the minute, everywhere. It always reminds me of the initial sequence in Coppola's Apocalypse Now, where Martin Sheen is in that filthy room inside Saigon, and he's saying, every minute that I'm here, Charlie out in the jungle is gaining ground. Charlie is winning while I'm here, and I cannot do anything. At the moment, the empire is in that filthy room in Saigon, and the empire is Charlie, and the jungle around it, all the Viet Congs around it. If we continue with that stupid metaphor by that stupid Spanish Borrell, the garden and the jungle now is not a jungle anymore. The jungle is a very well organized, huge garden, and they're getting together. And the little garden, a self described garden, is basically a dirty, filthy room in the old Saigon, in fact. So when they look around the world, especially after what happened in Kazan, which obviously they didn't understand, they understood that this was something big. They didn't know why. They didn't know. They didn't pay attention to what was being discussed. If you read the during Kazan, the headlines of the major media from the US to Canada to Western Europe was only Putin, and nothing about substance of the BRICS and the discussions and the fact that the whole global South was represented. And that big round table at the BRICS Plus session, where virtually the base the most important players of the global South were in that table, from Latin America, from Africa, from Central Asia, Southeast Asia, all across Eurasia, you name it. So obviously they are much more dangerous now. And in their paranoia, they identified what they call the three existential threats, which happen to be three top BRICS: Russia, China, and Iran. India, we all know the India hedging. They are always hedging. And now, because to a great extent, what Putin has been telling Modi, almost like a school teacher these past few weeks, like Putin is showing the facts of life to Modi, and Modi is waking up and saying, yeah, of course, I want to be one of the Eurasian big powers. I don't want to be a bloody sub-colony to the Anglo-Saxons again, right? So this is changing. It's what in one of my columns, about Kazan, I defined as the return of the Primakov triangle, which is now a Primakov quartet. The original RIC in BRICS, Russia, India, China, plus Iran. So it's RIIC. This is the Primakov quartet. These are the ones who are now driving the BRICS high-speed rail train, right? And on the other side of the Atlantic, they feel that something has happened. They don't know exactly what it is. To quote Bob Dylan, something's happening here, but you don't know what it is. Do you, Mr. Jones? No, Mr. Jones has no clue about what's going on. But they know it's a threat. And it's no wonder that he identified these three BRICS as the three main threats. So what do they have to offer to the BRICS space, to the BRICS plus place, to the global south? Absolutely nothing. What they have to offer is more debt, basically keep supporting our indispensable nations. And if you don't agree with our rules-based international order, we're going to sanction to death. We're going to keep threatening you. We're going to try an invasion. We're going to keep promoting color revolutions. We're going to steal elections, which is what they do all over the world. So the global south, the leaders of the global south, from the more moderate ones who are very tied because they don't have a lot of margin of maneuver, example, Egypt, to the ones that are relatively free and relatively sovereign, like Bolivia and Venezuela in South America, for instance. They look around and they see, now we need to get together and we need common protection. And sooner or later, we're going to need a security architecture to protect us all, because the hegemon is going to keep coming against us with all guns blazing, literally, sooner or later, sooner rather than later. So just complementing what we've been talking about, a few days ago, there was an absolutely outstanding interview by Alexei Morzin, who was, until a few days ago, he resigned after 23 years, the Russian executive director at the IMF. He was the executive director for Russia at the IMF. So he was at the, executive director level. So he was present in all the major meetings of the IMF this past more than 2 decades, right? And now he's back in Moscow. I plan to meet with him in person when I'm back in Moscow. A friend of us put us in contact, a mutual friend put us in contact, and we want to talk to each other better. And I have a list of enormous questions to ask him, especially about how the BRICS countries and the global south are treated inside the IMF. But he already, in this interview with RIA Novosti, he already more or less explained there is a blacklist at the IMF of countries that will never get any kind of help, even if they need it badly. And that includes Syria, Iran, Venezuela, Cuba, now lately Burkina Faso and Mali, and even Georgia, because Georgia voted the way now. We didn't like the results of the election. So now Georgia is also in the blacklist. And he also said blatantly that there is an anti-BRICS campaign inside the IMF as well. So when you compare this, coming from an insider who was actually inside the institution for 23 years, and then you compare to the Kazan Declaration, which was issued at the first day of the Kazan summit, when they very politely, very diplomatically, for many of us, we're saying, come on, these guys are being too polite. But that was a consensus. So BRICS consensus means usually the lowest common denominator, right? We are interested in a reform of international institutions, including Bretton Woods institution, more voting rights for the global south inside the IMF, etc. Everybody knows this will never gonna happen because it will be vetoed by the Americans. Same thing is presenting this declaration, which is a manifesto, a letter of intentions coming from the global south to the UN Security Council. The Americans won't even read it, or if they read it, they will block it, veto, throw it in the waste bin, whatever. So this is the problem. The global south, via BRICS especially, this train has already left the station, little by little. I use the metaphor of a giant lab. So what the BRICS will be doing, starting now, is testing all sorts of models in the BRICS lab, and sooner or later adapting some of them, and then adapting as a consensus, not only among the 9 BRICS officially. Saudi Arabia is still, in the fence, but the 13 partners. So we can have 22 nations soon, maybe not next year, but by 2026, alternative settlements, alternative payment settlements, the BRICS pay system, the BRICS bridge system evading SWIFT, clearance, a clearance only for BRICS countries, reinsurance only for BRICS countries, and sooner or later, it's a discussion that I had in Moscow a few before I came back, on BRICS ratings agency, because they need it badly. They cannot have trying to build us a different system, a parallel system, when the ratings agencies, economic ratings agencies, are all Western. Fitch, Moody's, these people. No, you need a BRICS ratings agency. And they were telling me, wow, we are starting also from scratch. It's very complicated. Even in Chinese terms, the Chinese are very afraid to go against US frontally. So BRICS will be progressing little by little, but sooner or later, in a space of, I would realistically 2 years, we're going to have some pretty heavy solutions and tested methods leading us towards an alternative international relations and economic relations and trade relations system. So one of the possible scenarios, especially if we have Trump elected, Nima, is that in the space of the Trump presidency, we can have a total split between the American system controlling the European vessels and the BRICS system agglutinating most of the global south. This is probably the most plausible, realistic scenario for the next few years. There will be a divide in the world because, once again, the people who run the show, these elites in the US, the Atlanticist elites, they will never accept their endless domination, as they described it, or end of history in every nonsense of the type, is coming to an end. So, we are really at it's a total clash, and it's not a clash of civilizations. This is stupid. It's a clash of a group of civilization states against a system that is inherently barbaric because disguises itself as egalitarian, democratic, promotion of freedom, our values, and all that crap, but it's inherently liberal, totalitarian. So whoever is elected now will be representing different strands of this liberal totalitarianism. In the case of Harris, it's basically an extension of the Davos Great Reset. And in the case of Trump, with some really hardcore totalitarian overtones as well. So it's Highway to Hell 1 and Highway to Hell 2. So get your AC/DC and start playing it, because this is going to be our soundtrack.
For many of us who are familiar with the Brazilian media, we know what has happened in terms of Venezuela in the BRICS summit.
Oof.
But could you describe us, for our audience, what has happened with the situation of Venezuela? Why did the government in Brazil decided to do that?
Okay, Nima, you are throwing me into the fire that consumed Savonarola in the Piazza della Signoria in Florence at the end of the 15th century. Because whatever I say, I will be thrown into the fire by a lot of Brazilians. I don't care because I am not a diplomat. I am an independent analyst uh, based in the global north, and I've been covering the global north as a foreign correspondent for the past 40 years. So my opinion in terms of Brazil, even though I am Brazilian, and even though I care deeply for a sovereign Brazil, uh, is the opinion of an outsider. I don't live there for a long time, even though, of course, I still have friends, contacts. I miss some of Brazil's places a lot. Uh, I supported President Lula in his first two mandates. I supported him when he was under a vicious campaign by the US deep state and by the Democrats who actually landed him in jail, which is something a lot of Brazilians forgot. I visited him in jail. I interviewed him in jail. But the Lula that we have now is not the Lula of decades or years ago, unfortunately. So using the benefit of the doubt and respecting the figure of Lula, the historic Lula, and Lula as a leader of the global South, his margin of maneuver nowadays is extremely slim. So he has to fight extremely powerful lobbies literally everywhere, inside his ministries, inside Congress, among the Brazilian ruling classes, the Brazilian comprador classes, which are one of the most rapacious and disgusting all over the world. And I've seen a lot all across the global South as a foreign correspondent everywhere. But the Brazilians are particularly vicious, nasty, ignorant, extremely arrogant. And why they don't move to live in Miami, New York? Forget it. Forget about the country where they were born. It's ridiculous. Anyway, so there are a lot of reasons about the Brazilian veto of Venezuela as a BRICS partner. By the way, this went down horribly in Kazan. I was assaulted by analysts and journalists from all over the world asking me, what the hell happened to Lula? So, it's very hard to explain in 1 or 2 minutes. Delegates from different BRICS delegations, of course, and the leaders themselves, and of course, the Russians and the Chinese, they looked at it and said, oh shit, we cannot trust these people anymore, or at least this government. So many reasons. First of all, the Americans came to collect Nima when Lula was elected, and they came to collect in person. Jake Sullivan went to Brasilia literally with the list of what Lula would have to do to repay American diplomatic, behind the scenes, Americans as influencers of helping Lula to be reelected. So that's it. Now you have to follow our list. And among this list, which is very, very serious, Lula has to subscribe to the G7 agenda and not the BRICS agenda. That's number one. So this is what comes from his master's voice. On top of that, the Itamaraty. Itamaraty is the Brazilian, as you know, Nima, is the Brazilian Ministry of Foreign Relations. Itamaraty is the beautiful palace that houses them in Brazil. There is and this I get from very good Brazilian sources, excellent, well-informed economists, former diplomats, analysts, etc. There is a huge anti-BRICS lobby inside the ministries, from the Itamaraty, the Ministry of Foreign Relations, to the Ministry of Finance. So BRICS is not a priority for them. Their priority is G7. This means their priority is his master's voice interests. And that brings us to the G20, which is going to be held in 2 weeks from now, if I'm not mistaken, in Rio. I decided not to go because I think it's a waste of time. And my friends in Brazil told me, don't come, it's going to be a waste of time. The G20 is going to be in Rio, And the agenda of this G20 has been already hijacked by the G7. So the agenda of the G20 is basically what the Americans want the Brazilians to do and what the European Commission wants the Brazilians to do. It's the same. It's the, let's say, the Davos consensus using one of the so-called leaders of the global south. And of course, apart from all that, Lula himself, he knows that his survival depends on following these agendas. If he doesn't, it's very simple. With one phone call, the Americans put him back in jail. That's how stark and how vicious it is. That's it. And he wants to survive. He's older now, with a new wife. You know, he wants to enjoy his last years in power. He doesn't want compromises. He already has to deal with a lot of horrible internal domestic problems. So obviously foreign policy is a secondary issue. And for most Brazilians, foreign policy doesn't even exist. They don't pay attention. They pay attention to surviving in Brazil, which is already is. So as you know, it's a very complicated affair, right? So to explain all that to the BRICS universe and to outsiders who care about Brazil. Brazil has an enormous soft power all over the world. Everybody knows that. And a decision like that, which implies interfering in the foreign policy of one of their neighbors, and not only that, blocking one of their neighbors to be a member of an organization that represents the global south. And the neighbor is a massive representative of the global south. And when it comes to energy, wow, it's the largest oil reserves on the planet are in the neighbor. So this one, in terms of a known goal, is hard to think of the Brazilians doing something that was even worse than losing to Germany 7-1 in the World Cup. This is much worse, much worse. And it's not that they're going to recover anytime soon, because also very important, guess who's the president of BRICS for 2025? Brazil. So the next BRICS summit, just like the one we had in Kazan, is going to be held in Brazil. And guess when they plan to hold this summit? In the middle of 2025. I was discussing this before going to Kazan, and I was like, is this decision final? And my interlocutor said, yes, it's final, because they said, no, we cannot do it later because there's that COP, stupid COP climate change thing in the Amazon rainforest in November next year, and we cannot have two summits at the same time. And in fact, they can't, because in terms of management, they are pathetic. They cannot organize. The organization of Kazan took virtually almost 1 year to prepare. It was almost faultless, considering the depth and the reach and the complexity of organizing everything, welcoming these delegations from all over the world in a relatively small city without disturbing too much the residents of Kazan and all that. And the Russians pulled that off. It was immensely impressive. Of course, for many of us was a problem. As media and as analysts, we had a very slim margin of maneuver. We had difficult access, practically non-existent access to the delegations. It was very hard to have a conversation with members of delegations. So we relied on our contacts to talk to some Sherpas or people from the BRICS Business Council, etc. Apart from and the security, of course, was massive, but he had to. Can you imagine a terror attack in the middle of a BRICS summit? And the Russians took this very seriously. So in terms of organizing something like this, was faultless. I wonder what the Brazilians are going to do next year. And we're going to see now with the G20. Let's see. But management is not one of their top qualities, to say the least. So when we put this all together, next year having a BRICS summit in the middle of the year, at least there's now. I prefer not to quote his name, but a top Brazilian economist, when he's back to Brazil, he's going to suggest, look, why don't we do recap at the end of the year in South Africa, because the G20 next year is going to be in South Africa. So we're going to have a lot of BRICS leaders there as well. So we get the BRICS leaders, you call the BRICS partners, and you do a recap of the whole year of BRICS, which is very, very important, because with all this lab testing of all these models next year, at the end of the year, we're going to have a lot of results, suggestions, etc., to put on the table. So the Brazilian presidency next year of BRICS is not going to be as active and as deep-reaching as the Russians this year. So we can say that the Russians did the heavy lifting this year, knowing that next year is not going to be so brilliant, And then there are parallel questions which are very important. For instance, Alexei Morzhin, which I mentioned in the beginning of our conversation. Before I went to Kazan, I was having conversations with finance tech people in Moscow and people from the Business Council. And there is a more or less a consensus among top experts that Alexei would be the ideal new president of the NDB, the BRICS Bank in Shanghai. Well, during Kazan, Putin said something on the record that is going to be hard to backtrack. Putin actually said that he supports the continuation of former President Dilma Rousseff as the head of the NDB. To put it very diplomatic, among top economists and top experts who know how the IMF and how the NDB work, they say openly, look, the best candidate would be Alexei. So he's going to be a top advisor to Elvira Nabiulina at the Russian Central Bank. That for the moment, this will be his next job, right? But he will be the exact right guy to conduct a total reform from scratch of the NDB starting next year, which, by the way, technically is the Russian presidency. So President Putin very magnanimously is extending another courtesy to the Brazilians to have Dilma continue as the president of the NDB, which, by the way, I preferred. I'm not expressing my own position. I'm expressing the position of top Russian and Chinese analysts. The best candidate would be a Russian, under a Russian presidency, Alexei Morzhin. So I rest my case for the moment, Nima. It's a very touchy issue for most Brazilians who follow foreign policy. It's a very touchy issue for the BRICS as a whole. And this element of having veto power inside BRICS and all the decisions based on consensus, sooner or later, there's got to be a revamping and go towards an absolute majority decisions. Otherwise, all the major decisions inside BRICS, there will be many more roadblocks than there already are. And the roadblocks that already are, and I, in my latest column, I more or less, I was outlining the major roadblocks, sorry, which will come from the hegemon. BRICS doesn't need internal roadblocks as well. They're trying to solve the internal differences among members, which is already a huge step. For instance, the day the summit started was chosen by Russia and China to announce to the whole world that they are getting their act together on Ladakh and the Himalayas and solving their border problems. This was enormous. It was the talk of the town the day the summit started, the morning that the summit started, the first day. And obviously, who was the mediator? President Putin. Putin got Modi and Xi to sit down and say, guys, this problem, you have to solve this border problem. And soon. So this was not at the start of the summit. This was weeks ago, if not months ago. But they chose the right date to announce it. So that was a major diplomatic coup. And this was a BRICS, inner BRICS, an intra-BRICS decision. Same thing, Iran and Saudi Arabia, which the Russians started the process. The Chinese clinched it. They sit on the same table in Beijing. They sign an agreement, back diplomatic relations. And now Iran and Saudi Arabia are talking about everything. Very, very important. BRICS decision. For instance, Egypt and Ethiopia, they have a huge problem because of a dam that they're building in the Nile. It's up to the BRICS to get Egypt and Ethiopia on the same table and solve this problem as well. So obviously, they don't need one of their members vetoing another one, which is it's bound to become a partner of BRICS. It's the same thing as we have the one African country vetoing Nigeria or vetoing Algeria. It's completely absurd, but it happened, and they're going to have to deal with it.
I think one of the most important points that you've mentioned is the way that Brazil, India are dealing with these internal and external affairs in terms of the relationship between the country and BRICS, because they're learning, it's a learning process how to
Mhm.
deal with the things. And they maybe in their mind, BRICS is not that big, but BRICS is growing. And that's why they're just thinking and putting out their mindset, their type of analysis, because at the end of the day, we know that BRICS in the future would dominate the foreign policy of these countries.
Yes.
They have to learn how to deal with that.
Excellent point, Nima. Exactly. It's a learning process. And that's why this metaphor of the lab, we all remember when we were in our labs in high school or in college, experiments. And we make mistakes. We learn from our mistakes, and the next experiment works. And then we can even publish our experiment as a great find. BRICS is like that. BRICS is a giant lab, and now it's starting for good. So everybody has to learn from their mistakes as well. I hope Brazilian foreign policy understand the huge mistake that they made, which antagonized uh, gratuitously antagonized so many big players, especially the big BRICS nations. Antagonized even the Emirates. Emirates and Venezuela, they are part of OPEC. So they talk to each other all the time. And everybody in BRICS would love to have a partner who has the largest oil reserves in the world, because in terms of BRICS as a natural resource powerhouse, with adding Venezuela, wow, go through the roof. So we hope that they learn from their mistakes. And in the case of India, we can say that there is a visible change in tone, and sometimes imperceptible, but you can see that they are paying much more attention to BRICS, to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, to their geoeconomic deals with other BRICS members, to the international North-South transportation corridor, which for India is going to be fantastic because it will get trade with Eurasia very close to India. So all these elements are important. And in the case of Turkey, which is incredible, even though Erdogan, he spent, I think, 12 hours or 14 hours because of that terror attack near Ankara. He had to leave earlier. But Erdogan went to Kazan visibly interested in becoming a BRICS partner, and Turkey is now an official BRICS partner among the 13. And of course, lobbying for getting into BRICS as a full partner as soon as there is a consensus among them. Um, for Turkey, well, Turkey is very complicated. After Kazana went to Istanbul, and I was talking to my connections over there, and they said, yes, of course. But he's hedging once again. He knows that getting close to BRICS, the Americans are going to freak out, NATO is going to freak out. So he wants to extract more concessions from the US and NATO. But that's how Erdogan plays. Everybody knows that. And the Russians and the Chinese, especially, they have no illusions about Erdogan. But the fact that officially Erdogan is ultra interested in Turkey, the role of Turkey as a major BRICS player, it's another diplomatic coup by the BRICS. And in terms of Southeast Asia, Nima, wow, they got 4 Southeast Asian powerhouses as partners. So the 4 top Southeast Asians, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, and Vietnam. Now they are partners. And the next step, they will become full members. And it's not by accident that several times during the summit, in his official interventions and in the bilaterals, Putin said explicitly the top two drivers of economic growth in the next few years are going to be Africa and Southeast Asia. So we have three more African partners as BRICS and four Southeast Asians. There you go.
Yeah. Right now, when you look at these two conflicts in Ukraine and in the Middle East, in your opinion, which one is much more difficult to get solved by any sort of international inter community going after some sort of negotiations, finding some sort of solution for the conflict? And we have to consider that in the mind of the neocons, those policymakers in the United States, the conflict with China is the priority right now. How
Mhm.
do you see these two active conflicts right now? Which one is much more difficult?
West Asia, Nima, there's no question. Um, well, during this week is the Valdai. I'm following. I decided not to go this year. First of all, because I was tired as hell, and second, okay, let's see it from the outside. Let's see the American election. It's good to have an outsider point of view many times. When you are in Russia, you get deep into it all the time, right? So it's good to watch the Valdai from outside Russia. Yesterday morning was an excellent session. I commented this already with Sergei Karaganov. And Karaganov was saying that he said extraordinary stuff about wars. But I think there is one thing that he perhaps, because he's deeply involved in Russia and not in West Asia, he underestimated the volatility of the West Asia situation. He said that we have to make sure that the proxy war in Ukraine is the last big war of the century. No, because there will be a resolution. Everybody knows that Russia won, is winning, and will win in Ukraine. The question is a question of modalities, how and how deep. The problem is, and this is a relatively soluble problem if the Americans finally see that their project Ukraine was doomed from the start. They will never recognize that, but they will try to go for one of those impromptu exits, just like Afghanistan. When they saw that the Afghan project went down the drain, they left, which is something that might happen, might happen in Ukraine. West Asia is much more complicated because this is if you look in terms of a forever war with no solution in sight, it's West Asia. And now it's not only Israel Palestine, now it's Israel completely out of control with a war cabinet controlled and basically dictated by a bunch of Talmudic genocidal cycles. This is what they are against not only Iran, against not only Palestine, but against Iran and against the whole axis of resistance. So the war is Israel backed by the hegemon, and in many aspects, the US Israeli combo against the whole axis of resistance. And the axis of resistance has at least diplomatic support, and in many aspects, something else from Russia and China. So essentially, once again, it's a war of the declining hegemon and its aircraft carrier in the Middle East, former Middle East, West Asia, against the BRICS. Once again, it goes back to the same point. Or Eurasia against NATO stan, because NATO stan supports Israel. So this is a NATO stan war with Israel as a member of an official, semi-official, underground, you name it, member of NATO, against Eurasia. And Eurasia represented by the axis of resistance and with support of big Eurasian powers like Russia and China. So the clash is always the two camps of this 21st century clash are very well delimited for years now. And now we have this exploding not only in these two, uh, let's say, subplots of the forever wars, Ukraine and West Asia, but any possibility of hybrid war, of color revolution across Eurasia, that's the same thing. It's the dwindling empire trying to limit their losses. Moldova, Georgia, what might happen in Transnistria, any possible new revolutions in the Caucasus, possible revolutions in smaller Central Asians like Kyrgyzstan or Tajikistan. All that is part of it. And of course, in terms of Latin America, there will continue to be Monroe Doctrine style interventions. They secured Argentina for now. We don't know how long this is going to last. Brazil is interference in Brazil will be at top level because Brazil is considered the big prize in Latin America. In Africa, they are in retreat, and so they are desperate because they are basically losing Africa across the spectrum. So I know the situation in Eurasia. There's going to be, fires erupting everywhere across Eurasia, practically nonstop. And that's the huge problem. And this is a derivation of ramifications of the war, US, Israel, hegemon Israel, the combo against the axis of resistance. And if this goes out of control, we will involve all the peripheral actors as well: Egypt, Jordan, Northeast Africa, even Turkey, the Caucasus, you name it. So this is the definitive unresolvable war of the 21st century, and there is not going to be a solution for Palestine. And now, if Trump wins the election, even worse, because it will be the return of Abraham Accords 2.0, and they will try very hard to start implementing it, which means erosion, eradication, annihilation, extermination of Palestine.
Yeah. How about the conflict between Iran and Israel? Do you think that recently JD Vance was talking about that the American interest is not to go to a major war with Iran, which it's different from what the Israelis are asking for.
Yes.
And do you think that because if they don't want a major war with Iran, they have to consider some sort of solution for what Israel is doing in that region? Do you think what would be their policy if Trump wins? Let's assume that if Trump wins, what would be their policy in terms of bringing the tensions down in the Middle East?
I don't see it bringing the tensions down, Nima. Remember the beginning of our conversation where I was outlining possible Trump administration acts vis-a-vis Iran. One of them is a limited bombing campaign. They know that they cannot invade Iran. They tried all the scenarios tested by the Pentagon. They were absolute disasters. They won't have refueling bases. Everybody around will say, no, you cannot use your bases here to attack Iran. You name it. So the only thing that they could do is a horrible bombing campaign. Will that solve anything? Of course not. Because Iran then will see that Iran is being attacked as an existential threat. And what they're going to do, they're going to revert the official fatwa by Khomeini and then reiterated by Khamenei. They will go for a nuclear weapon. Obviously, there's no other way to dissuade an aggression like this, of course. So, well, from the Obama-Hillary combo, which is going to, if in case she's elected, there may be some windows of dialogue, at least. Don't forget that the vice president of Iran is Zarif. And Zarif has very good channels with the Democrats, starting with when he was hanging out with John Kerry in Geneva, in Vienna, etc. So there may be a possibility of some sort of dialogue, which is not going to change the way the hegemon behaves vis-a-vis Israel. It's still Zionist controlled, Capitol Hill, Security Council, presidency, main silos of the deep state. This is not going to change. We all know that. You know, so it's the difference between slim margin of maneuver to find some sort of agreement to naked aggression. It's not very optimistic, right, Nima?
Many people are asking right now, where is Joe Biden in the United States? But
Nobody knows. He's
who's
trying.
in charge?
No. Well, everybody knows that he's not in charge. We all know that in charge now is the so-called Biden combo, which means the usual suspects that we see their faces every day: Sullivan, Blink, and these people, and of course the donors, the guys in the back who never show up, who put on with the money and follow my agenda, etc. These are the people who are running the show. Um, and it's absolutely pathetic when we see that the so-called indispensable nation, there's no one at the helm. And obviously, this is not discussed on the front page of the New York Times, the Washington Post. No, it's not. It's normal. Like the coup against the zombie a few months ago, when they come up with a candidate, she cannot even string two sentences in a row making sense. This is beyond appalling. It's normal, you know. And it's very easy to not only organize this internal coup, even though everybody knew that he was a zombie, but install a candidate that is unprepared to run a hot dog stand. Can you imagine running the United States? And this is treated by mainstream media as a normal fact of life. Well, of course, they are incapable of introspection, self-reflection, critical thinking. Obviously, but we all know that. The decline of the educational standards in the U.S., including top universities, the fact that these career bureaucrats, the only thing that they think is their own career, in fact, and their retirement with fat pensions, just like in Europe, just like in the European Union. So the system is runs by inertia, and of course is run essentially by those powerful silos in the deep state. And when we look at the geoeconomic comparison, it's a discussion that I had in Moscow this year many times, and I was always walking back home thinking about it. I said, "Wow." And they know it, and there's nothing they can change about it. For instance, trying to create a new geoeconomic system from scratch, how are you going to sell this to huge multinational companies? And my interlocutors are always saying, when we go and talk to the CEO of a big company X or Y, they say, yeah, but the current system works for everybody. It's been working like this for decades. We're used to it. It's easy. Why do you want to come up with something different? You see? So the whole thing runs by inertia on the international financial system level, geoeconomic level, geopolitical level, and even running the so-called hegemon. And how are you going to change it? From scratch. In fact, in the US, will have to be from scratch. How are you going to change this dictatorship of the industrial military complex, what our friend Ray McGovern calls industrial military, congressional media, academia, think tank complex, which is the whole thing. When you live in Washington, you see how it works. It's amazing. You don't go anywhere to get a different point of view. You have the same point of view in different gradations, but it's still the same script that goes everywhere. So if you go to talk to a think tank in DC, and then you read the Washington Post, and then you go to talk to somebody in Capitol Hill, it's the same script all the time. So when you see how the system works from the inside, I said, how are you going to change this thing? You know,
Just to wrap up this session, Pepe,
okay.
the I asked where is Joe Biden, but right now let's ask where is the European Union? And
That's even better, Nima.
it's unbelievable when you look at they're afraid to death when with the case of Donald Trump if he wins right now. And in the Middle East, you don't see any sort of policy coming out of the European Union. There's
Correct.
just there's just it seems that they don't exist. It's unbelievable. These countries, these huge countries in Europe, and you don't hear from them.
Absolutely right, Nima. And I am in one of them right now.
Yeah.
And since I arrived here back in Afghanistan, wow, my impressions are like I came from a highly civilized social organization and I landed in a big mess, a swamp. You go out in the streets of Paris and it's horrible. It's dirty. Nothing works. The level of service is appalling. It's dangerous. The atmosphere is completely neurotic. Apart from little pockets, now Paris has some little pockets of extreme wealth where you don't notice anything. But if you deviate like 1 or 2 blocks from these neighborhoods, it's a total disaster. Soup kitchens, homeless people, people sleeping in the dirty streets everywhere. The metro is a disgrace. You know, it's always late. It's dirty. It's cramped. It's crowded. You know, it's a wow. And this is one of the capitals of the planet. And when you come from Moscow and you make the direct comparison, it's like absolutely mind-boggling. And then when you start, okay, let's recap what's been happening in Brussels this past few days and weeks. Total paralysis, desperation. They are in a huge campaign trying to, as if they could vote, right? Trying to prevent Trump as the new Hitler to come to power. This is the thinking in the corridors of power in Brussels. Really, really. And at the same time, what do they do, Nima? And I would say this is the Dadaist manifesto element to our conversation. They are in the middle of a bloody trade war against the US and against China at the same time. They slap sanction on China. The Chinese look at that. Ah, yeah, are you sure? Okay, we're going to slap a little bit of sanctions against you. Let's see how you react. And on the other side, they know that when Trump comes to power, first thing he's going to do, tsunami of sanctions, not only against China, but against the EU. So the non-existent EU that you just mentioned a few minutes ago, they are an existing desperation row thing. You know, they are setting themselves on fire like that monk in the beginning of the Vietnam War. Okay, maybe if we die in the middle of a fire, we're gonna have good karma in our next incarnation. You know, there's no way out for them, and they box themselves in. Their stupid policies box themselves in. They continue with this enormous nonsense, not to say bullshit, about Ukraine. They want to use this next $50 billion package. They want to use 20 billion out of frozen, stolen, confiscated Russian funds. The Russians already said, get ready because we're going to do the same thing with your companies here in Russia, and a lot of them are still in Russia. They never abandoned Russia. They continue to do business in Russia. So they're going to suffer because of your stupidity, you know. So they keep buying a war against Russia across the spectrum. They are buying a trade war against China, and they're going to be victims of a trade war by the US. So your definition is perfect. They are less than non-existence. They are like a pathological infection. They are a bacteria somewhere. You know, it's mind-boggling. But try to have this conversation here, Nima. Out of the question, you know. And if they have the chance, you're going to have a knock on the door. you name it. You cannot have this conversation in France, in Germany, in Italy. They will go after, if you're an academic, they'll go after you. You're going to lose your job. You may lose your pensions. They're going to attack your bank accounts. You name it. They criminalize you. In Germany, they actually criminalize you if you start talking like this. It's beyond pathetic, really. And when I this past few days, the few conversations that I had with local people, when you talk to average people, the only thing that they talk now is high prices and inflation. You never had this conversation in Paris before, until 2-3 years ago. Never. Now they see what the global south has to live with every day: high prices, inflation, loss of jobs, high unemployment, high taxes, no service, no decent services is coming from the central powers, you name it. Now they are being welcomed to the real jungle.
Yeah. I don't know if you saw the talk that Jeffrey Sachs had recently at the Cambridge University. He had, when you look at the level of questions asking that we are fighting for democracy in Ukraine. If we don't do that, Russia gonna march toward Europe. They want to destroy democracy. Unbelievable when the level of knowledge in these universities.
And this is a top
Unbelievable.
university, Nima.
Yeah.
Can you imagine the others? Yeah.
And Jeffrey Sachs was like this. How can I respond to this? He had to start from scratch to
Exactly. And you have to explain
unbelievable.
everything from scratch. Exactly. Um, there's no context on anything in the educational system and on mainstream media. Coming back to our BRICS example, um, I didn't read. I had no time and no patience to read it. But if you could at least read the headline and the first paragraph of mainstream media articles about BRICS, is the same thing. Not a single word or couple of words about context of what was going on in Kazakh. It was only an autocrat gets his club together to threaten the West. How can people possibly be informed enough to express a judgment about what's going on? It's impossible. It's exactly what Jeffrey saw. It was in Harvard, right?
Cambridge.
Cambridge. Oh, shit. Cambridge. Can you imagine that Cambridge used to be the top university in the UK? This was a long time. I'm a very old guy. A long time ago. For instance, Lee Kuan Yew, the guy who actually invented modern Singapore and made modern Singapore firepower, graduated from Cambridge. And all the top bureaucrats in Singapore, you have to do your PhD in Cambridge. There you go.
Muito obrigado, Pepe.
Obrigado a você,
Grande
querido.
prazer, como sempre.
Vamos ver o grande show hoje.
Vamos ver hoje o que vai acontecer. Muito obrigado, viu?
Okay, you too,
Tenha
man.
um bom
Take
dia
care.
aí.
Cheers. Bye bye. Bom dia. Bye
Bye-bye.
bye. Ciao.
Tchau.